Coming to you from the podcast studio of WTAP+. This is your quick guide to today's health questions and your connection to real-world health tips. You're watching Keeping It Healthy.
Welcome to this segment of Keeping It Healthy, where we discuss all topics on health. In this segment, Gene Stories Understanding PALB2, the podcast where we discuss hereditary breast cancer, talk openly, share experiences, and learn from each other. I'm Stephanie Plant, and I'm here with my guest, Kelly Kuhn, who is my cousin. Today, we're diving into something deeply personal for many families, including mine personally, the PALB2 gene mutation. If you're listening and you or your loved one carry this mutation, you're not alone. More than 2,000 people in North America carry a PALB2 gene mutation, and many don't even know it yet. So let me introduce my special guest, who is just diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer this past October and discovered that she had the PALB2 gene mutation in 2020. Thank you, Kelly, for agreeing to join me and discuss this very important topic.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm happy to be here. I am obviously your cousin, and I'm from this area. And after working 25 years in my job, I finally retired and was all excited to do some things in my retirement. And this past October, I was diagnosed with triple-negative breast cancer. And so I've spent the last few months dealing with that. And it all stems back to this PALB2 gene mutation that I found out about in 2020.
Yeah, so a lot going on the last few months.
Right.
Yeah. Well, before we dive into your story and our family story, let's talk a little bit about what the PALB2 gene mutation is for our listeners. So PALB2 stands for partner and localizer of the BRCA2 gene. Think of the BRCA as a security guard in your cells protecting against cancer. PALB2 is like the walkie-talkie that helps the security guards do their job. When PALB2 isn't working correctly, the security system breaks down. And I think a lot of people out there probably know what the BRCA gene is, but the PALB2 is one of the lesser-known genes that is out there. So let's talk a little bit about what the PALB2 gene means and so forth. So you were diagnosed in 2020 with PALB2. And originally your mother had breast cancer and double breast cancer, right?
Just it was a single breast.
Single breast, okay. So let's start there for just a minute. Walk me, how old were you when you find out your mother has breast cancer?
Oh, gosh. I was in college, so early, maybe my first or second year of college, and I was living in Morgantown at the time, and she had called me on the phone, and she had said, I've been diagnosed with breast cancer, going to start chemo, and at the time it wasn't a very good diagnosis that she had gotten, but she ended up having surgery. She had a lumpectomy, and she had chemo, and she actually made it to the 5-year mark. And after that, it ended up coming back, and then it had metastasized, and she ended up making it. They gave her a year and a half to live when she was diagnosed the second time, and she made it about 3 years from that. So I was 34 around there when she passed away.
34, such a young age. So the first diagnosis that you got, you were in college, and you get that phone call. What was going through your mind when your mother's on the other end of the phone telling you that she has breast cancer? Did you understand to that extent what that meant? I mean, was that...
I did, because our grandmother, our which was my mother's mother, and your grandmother as well, had gone through breast cancer for many years before that. And I was 15 when she passed away. So my grandmother, our grandmother, she had pretty much had cancer for a good portion of my life. It seemed like, from the time I was a young child, she was diagnosed with breast cancer as well. So I had a good understanding of what my mom was about to go through. But, it's your mom. And, when you hear that news, it's always kind of devastating.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about our grandmother. And so I met you later in my life, and so I didn't get the opportunity to necessarily be there and go through our grandmother's diagnosis and so forth. So how old were you when she was diagnosed?
I was probably a young child. She passed away at age 60, and she had battled it pretty much all through her 50s and maybe even late 40s. So I was 15 when she passed away. So it seemed like as a kid, growing up, grandma always had cancer.
Yeah.
So you just kind of learned to deal with it. She was always going through a chemo treatment or having a surgery or not feeling well,
Yeah.
and losing her hair. So you kind of, I don't want to say it became the norm, because it certainly, you don't want it to be a norm, but it was something I was used to seeing.
Yeah. And so did she have triple negative breast cancer? Do we know
We
that?
don't know.
Okay.
And I don't know about my mother's either. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been almost 20 years since my mother passed away. So, at the time they weren't maybe they were testing for what type it was so they could treat it with the type of chemo, but it wasn't anything that I was ever told.
Yeah, yeah. So both your mother and our grandmother, they had mastectomies, or
Yes.
both of them?
Single mastectomies.
Single mastectomies, okay. So breast cancer is just one of the cancers that is associated with this PALB2 gene mutation. The other cancers that are associated that they know that are direct linked are ovarian cancer and pancreatic cancer. So, let's talk about ovarian cancer. In our family, was there anybody that had ovarian cancer?
My mother, we had a first cousin, my mother's first cousin, so it would have been your father's first cousin as well.
Yeah.
She had ovarian cancer. That's the only one that I'm aware of.
That was, yeah. But there was also multiple breast cancer diagnoses
Right.
in the family.
Right. Our grandmother had, she was one of 11 siblings, and I think all of them but one ended up having some type of cancer, and majority of the women had breast cancer.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we're going to fast forward just a little bit here. So you were diagnosed with the PALB2 gene mutation in 2020. But let's talk about how that came to be. So I'm going to back up and talk a little bit about how I got the diagnosis, and then we'll kind of fast forward there.
Sure.
So I was 21 years old when I started having problems, and I remember I had my first surgery at age 21. My girls were young. It was a lumpectomy, so it wasn't really, in my mind, a big deal. When they did the biopsy, it was obviously negative at that time. But from age 21 to there on out, I definitely was under surveillance for multiple, biopsies and ultrasounds and so forth. So my journey with this began at age 21. At one point, they had recommended genetic testing, and I think that it was just in passive conversation, that it never really happened. And then back in 2019, they said, "Hey, I think we probably need to go ahead and get a genetic test. You know, you need to go through this genetic testing. And when you go through the genetic testing, they put you through this chart, and so you have to write down everything that you know about your family history, right? Mm-hmm. You went through that as well, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, they determine whether you actually qualify to get the genetic testing. So I went through that, and I didn't think another thing of it. And I was in the vehicle with my daughter and one of my grandsons, and we had just come back from a little small surgical procedure of his, and I remember the phone call. I got the phone call, and the doctor saying, this is Dr. So-and-so, are you by yourself? Are you able to talk? And I said, well, I'm in the car with my daughter, and could you call back? Because I kind of was fearful that I was going to get some news that I didn't want her to be concerned about or worry about at that very time. Yeah, so they called me later that evening, 8 o'clock, and told me, you're positive for this PALB2. I had no idea what that meant or what that was going to mean for moving forward. So after I found out that I was positive, I, said, okay, I probably need to reach out to you, and, we need to have a conversation and let you know that I was positive for that. And so do you want to walk through how that conversation went on the phone? Because I think this is a really important piece for our listeners out there. So I pick up the phone. Go ahead.
Well, first I want to backtrack just slightly.
Yeah.
To when I've been tested twice, have done the genetic testing twice. So I moved here back from where I was living in Maryland in 2013, and 2013 was when Angelina Jolie came out and said, I've got this BRCA gene, and she went ahead and had the preventative double mastectomy. So I moved back here, and I went to my gynecologist, and we got to talking about the breast cancer risk, and my mom and grandmother, and I had been getting mammograms since I was 25 because of that. And she said, well, why don't you go ahead and get tested for the BRCA genes? So I did, and they came back negative, and I thought, okay, dodged a bullet, moved on. I must be taking after my dad's side of the family rather than my mom's with breast cancer. And so I was living my life and I'm negative for all the genetic mutations until you called me. And when you called me in 2020 and said, have you been tested? And I said, well, yeah, I've been tested. I'm negative, and I didn't think anything of it. And you were very insistent that, well, there's other ones, and I'm positive for PALB2, and you probably should get tested for this one and any other genes that they have out there. So, I kind of, when you first called me, it kind of was shocking because I was like, I didn't know the knowledge is power. I had no idea there were others out there besides these BRCA genes until you called and said that. And so then I went and talked to my doctor and had the testing done, and lo and behold, guess what? I was positive as well.
Yeah. So you want to talk about when you got that piece of information, where were you? What were you doing? How did they notify you?
I was actually in my doctor's office. So I had gone for the testing, and then I came back, and I'll be honest, the whole time I'm still kind of in that not denial, but I'm taking after my dad's side of the family. I'm not going to be positive. And the doctor walked in and said, I have some bad news. You are positive for this PALB2 gene. And I was like, oh, okay, of course I am. I've got this family history, so not surprising. I don't think it hit me until I got out in the car. And then I got out in the car and I broke down. And so then I thought, well, what am I going to do? and that, I wasn't even sure at that point in time what the options were. So, my doctor, this was my gynecologist, sent me to a geneticist and an oncologist to kind of look at the next steps and what were the options. Well, now that you know this piece of information, what can you do about it?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. So at the same time, not only did I contact you, but I have 2 daughters. So, and they were young ladies, and I said, here's the information. This is your option if you want to get tested. I think once you have a diagnosis of a cancer gene, you have to weigh the options. Do I want to be tested or not?
Do you want to know or not? Right.
Do you want to know or not? Because once you do know, I think you feel like I've got to take some path of action. There's got to be an action, and that journey can be different. That can be a different path for everyone. But both of my daughters were tested, and both of them are also positive. So as a mother, that was just, you never want to share that.
Right.
That's not something I wanted for them to have to be, positive for. But let's jump in and talk about the options, right? So you go to the geneticist and your oncologist, and how did they break down what your options were?
Well, I saw the geneticist first, and she went through, we had to fill out the family questionnaire, the whole history of everything, and they do some kinds of calculation based, they know what the risk factors are with the PALB2 gene, and then they weigh in your family history. And so I was told at the time I had a 67% chance of getting cancer. But the positive person in me says, that means I have a 33% chance of not getting it. So that's what I kept in my mind, is I still have a chance of not getting cancer. So that's what I'm going to live with. So after I saw her, I saw the oncologist, who gave me, well, here's your options, knowing this piece of information. You can do nothing. You can do some monitoring. And they ended up, suggesting every 6 months with monitoring. Or you can have surgery, a preventative double mastectomy. Also, since it has ovarian cancer, you could do a preventative ovarian removal. And then the pancreatic cancer, since that's the third one, they said, we can do scans. My choice at the time, because of the oncologist I was seeing, I trusted him with the information. He said, I'm so confident that we'll catch it early, I suggest the monitoring. And he what he did with me, I've been thinking about this ever since, I guess really since the first time I got tested, and I'm like, well, if I ever found out, what would I do? And then now I have this piece of information, what would I do? And immediately I thought, well, I've got this piece of information. I know I have this PALB2. My first thought was, I'm just going to have a double mastectomy and get it over with. And after talking with my oncologist, he said, I'm so confident that we can catch this early. If you're in that 67%, if we catch it early, if you have it, we will catch it so early that we will be able to take care of it. You may not even need to have chemo. And so, in my case, that's what I ended up doing. Was I did the monitoring route. So every 6 months, I was getting tested. I was getting a mammogram in the spring, and I was getting a breast MRI in the fall. And so I've done that for the last 5 years. So what about you?
So my journey was a little different, and I the reason they had sent me for the genetic testing, or I had gone through the genetic testing, they had just biopsied. I had gone through biopsy, and I had some problems with my lymph nodes, that there was some questionable places. So when I got the diagnosis and I went to see the oncologist, she had sent me on to a breast surgeon at that point. She felt that for me, the option was a mastectomy. Now, I think it's real important to note that I was given every option, right? I think that in my experience, I've had, the shared decision making that I think, between the physicians and surgeons and the patient, I've definitely had that experience. They too said, here's your options. And I found out in June of 2020. Is that right? Yeah, I think 2020 in June, and then
Because I was in August.
and you
right
were in
after
August.
that.
Okay, that's these dates. But I was scheduled for surgery December 1st, 2020. So we made that decision, and they had taken a biopsy 2 weeks prior to my mastectomy, and at that point, I have to note this because we were in the height of COVID, right?
Right.
So I had a biopsy done 2 weeks prior to when I was having the mastectomy, and at that point they had found some radial scarring and some abnormal cells. And I got a call from my breast surgeon a couple days before my scheduled mastectomy, and he said, "Hey, we're in the process of where the hospital is, mandating only COVID patients, and however, I still want to bring you in. I want you to have the mastectomy because I am concerned about what the cells that were there." They didn't shut the hospital down. I was able to have the mastectomy, and then I had a 4-night stay in recovery. I had a deep flap at that point in time. So that's a surgery where they actually use tissues to reconstruct the breast. So that's the path that I took at that point in time. So it was an immediacy on my part.
Well, and, I remember that conversation we had when you told me and you said, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and have the double mastectomy." And, in my head, I thought, well, that's what I would always do too if I, found out. And then, of course, I did find out, and then I didn't end up doing it. My case was a little different. You said you've been doing this since you were 21 years old. You had issues and had lumps and biopsies, and I had nothing. I had no issues since my entire life, and they just had me monitoring with mammograms starting at age 25. I was doing it every 2 years until I hit 40, and then it was every year. Actually, it was 35, and then it was every year. So it's interesting, when we look back, when you find this information about the PALB2 gene and, the options of how you end up going about and making your decisions based on what's happened to you in the past, or what, in my case, what has not happened.
Yeah. And so you had a scan, your last scan. Can you walk me through the last 8 months from a scan perspective to what's happened and where you are today?
Well, as I said before, I had it in my head. I'm in that 33%. I'm getting these scans for the last 5 years, every 6 months. I'm getting the scan. My mammogram in the spring, my breast MRI in the fall, and after I'd have it, I'd look in my chart and then talk to my, I'd see the results, and I'm like, okay, I'm in that 33%. So I've been positive this whole time. So it was quite a surprise when I had, I went up there for my routine breast MRI and didn't think a thing of it until my chart popped up, and I looked at it, and I said to my husband, I said, "Oh, it says it's abnormal. There's some abnormal cells." And I said, "Well, I'm getting older. I have dense breast. Maybe it's just a cyst." So I still wasn't really concerned about it. And this was on a Wednesday. On Friday, the doctor's office called me and said, we have a biopsy scheduled for you for next week. And I was like, oh, okay. So, again, I guess I was still in that kind of denial. I'm in that 33% phase. So I went and had my biopsy, and then they called me that following Friday, which happened to be Halloween, and said, it's cancer. And, oh, by the way, well, not oh, by the way, but it's triple negative.
So let's talk about that for a second. So when you hear that it's triple negative, how are you feeling then? Because you and I both know what triple negative means. So walk me through that.
So I was in my car when they called, and they said, do you want to pull over? And I said, well, no. Now that you're asking me if I want to pull over, I certainly don't want to pull over. Just keep talking. So I ended up driving, and I was close to my house, pulled in my driveway. And so I just sat in the car and listened to what they had to say. And so when she's telling me, or they're telling me that I've got triple negative, I'm like, well, what does that mean? And they explained to me that there's 3 hormones, and they're the estrogen, progesterone, and then the HER hormone. And so they said you're negative. If your cancer was caused by one of those 3, then they would have been positive. So you could have had an estrogen positive cancer. All of them were negative. So then they call that triple negative. And I said, wow, okay. So if it's not caused by hormone, well, what's it caused by? And the response I got was, we don't know. It's your body just decides it doesn't like you anymore and decides it's going to grow some cancer. Because, I'm a fixer, and so my first thought was, well, what did I do wrong, and what can I change if it was something that I did? And so it was, that kind of a devastating, first of all, hearing triple negative, because I had heard all along how aggressive triple negative could be. And it was the worst one because it's the hardest to treat. So, I kind of sat in my car there for a bit, just taking it all in before I had to go in the house and tell my husband.
Yeah. So you walk in the house, you've gotten this information, you're trying to process it all and understand it, and walk in, and so you walk in and tell your husband. So how did he react to that?
He's also of the same mindset I am, where we try to always look at the positive sides, and don't panic if you have no reason to panic. Don't panic until you have all the information. And so I came in, and we actually had another family member at the house at the time, so it was really hard for me to just kind of act normal. And
right.
And so that person left, the family member left, and so I said to my husband, I said, yeah, that abnormal result, and I got my biopsy results, and it is cancer. And he's like, okay, well, we'll get through this. And he's been wonderful throughout this whole journey since I was diagnosed.
It takes a team to get through this.
Certainly does.
For sure. So, all right, let's. So now you've got this diagnosis, and they're moving quickly on this, right?
Quickly.
So yeah. So you've gone up and you've done the biopsy, and so. What happened from now? Okay, so you've told your husband, you're gonna attack this. You guys are gonna get this taken care of.
So they had the surgery. They got the surgery scheduled. Well, actually, I take that. Let me step back. I had met with a breast surgeon and talked through the options. The options were a lumpectomy, a single mastectomy, just because it was only in the one breast, or a double. I don't think they were actually leaning towards the double. I walked in. I knew what I was going to do. I walked in and said, "We're doing the double mastectomy. No ifs, ands, or buts." And they kind of looked at me and said, "Well, are you sure?" I said, "Look, I've had 5 years to think about this. Since I've known about the PALB2, and even longer. Before that, I always thought, well, what if?" So I knew what I wanted to do, and they said, "Okay, we're going to schedule it. And as a result of having the double mastectomy, and because they caught it early, that's the good thing. Because I was being monitored because of the PALB2 genetic mutation, family history, they caught it early. Because I was going to go and have the double mastectomy, they said no radiation would be needed, and possibly no chemo, but they wouldn't know until after they analyzed the tissue after the surgery.
And that tissue has been analyzed?
It has. So there were some atypical cells in the other breast. So they said that would have likely turned into cancer as well. So I made the right decision, and very happy about that.
Yeah. So, okay. So you had the surgery within how long of that diagnosis with this triple negative?
6-7 weeks. So it was about 6 weeks after the diagnosis, I had the surgery.
Yeah. So, so you, along with my youngest daughter and myself, we've all gone through the mastectomy and what that looks like to prep for it. You want to talk a little bit about maybe what goes into that? So somebody out there that may be listening to this and they're headed down a path, right? How do you prepare for what you're getting ready to go through? What were some of the things that you did to prep? Okay, now we've got this on the books. We're scheduling a surgery. How do I prep? What do I need to do to get ready?
So I did a lot of research, and there's a good side and a bad side to doing research because Google isn't always your friend.
Google's not always right.
There's a lot of stuff out there, and it can be scary. I did actually talk to my doctor about some good resources. They were able to provide some documentation on preparing for this. Things I did myself were made sure everybody, my friends and family knew, because I needed that support system. I prepared by talking to you because you had been through it. I mean, you were one of the first people I called and said, hey, I'm going to go through this. What do I need? And I sent you a text, and you sent me a list of things I needed to get to prepare. I did meal prepping. I got my house ready. Things from reading all the things that I needed to do. I bought a recliner because I was going to have to sleep and not be able to roll over, for a known amount of time. And so those are some of the things that I did based upon your recommendations of you need to buy this, you need to buy that, be prepared with these kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. I did a lot of research when I first. I'm a fixer, just like you. Okay, let's go.
It's a family trait.
We've got this. We're doing it. We're gonna come out on the other side, and we're gonna do this. So, I did a lot of research, and yeah, there was Facebook and all those groups. Sometimes they're your friends, sometimes they're not, because it's a place that people tend to go to the worst, right?
Yeah, the negative stories.
And so just being able to get through that minutia and extrapolate the positive out of there and figure out what you need. But some of the things that I think that I can go back and remember that were so important for someone that may be considering or having to go through a mastectomy. I remember preparing, okay, I know I'm going to have this major healing, right? These incisions, they're going to have to heal. I've got to start increasing my protein. And so I remember, okay, I was calculating how many grams of protein did I need in order for this healing to work the way it needed to work. And so I was putting, 96 grams of protein, a day. And then I knew after the surgery had happened that I added in even more protein. And I can remember I was walking into the hospital room and walking to the hospital that day, and my husband was able to be there for the surgery. He had to leave as soon as the surgery is over, because we're in COVID and there was no
Right.
visitors. So it was I was there in the hospital for 4 nights. And so I knew that was happening. And I remember I even was packing my little bone broth and some extra protein supplements that I knew needed. A long charging phone cord was something that I was so thankful that somebody had said to me, you need this while you're in the hospital.
I'm glad you said that to me as well, because I got my long phone cord for the hospital.
Yeah, right. And then a wedge. I've talked to several people, and they are, in terms of not knowing that there's this wedge that's available. I used it everywhere. I took it, and it just helps keep you supported up, because coming from your back to sitting up is not easy to do. And we were talking just before we come on the podcast. You said yesterday you got released to raise your hands. You want to talk about that? Because somebody that hasn't gone through that, they don't realize that there's a limit of mobility when you have a mastectomy.
Well, and so again, here's our stories are slightly different, because you had immediate reconstruction, the deep flap reconstruction.
Yeah.
I'm having a delayed deep flap reconstruction, so my surgery for that won't be until a few months from now. I just went through the mastectomy part, so I don't have like the abdominal restraints and restrictions that you did. So it's been a little bit of a different recovery, I guess, with that. But so it's been 6 weeks since my surgery, and I've had the restrictions of no more than 2 pounds lifting, which it's amazing how many things are way more than 2 pounds that I have a little hand weight at home just to compare what the weight is. So the lifting restrictions, I'm not able to lift my arms above my head. And so prepping for that, one thing that's good is making sure things are down at a level you can reach it, because I discovered that right off the bat after coming home from my surgery when I went to get a glass out of the cabinet, and I couldn't reach it. And so, there's so many things where, I'm like, I can't reach that. But I do have a grabber. I'm able to reach some things with a grabber, but
I love my grabber. I remember having it in my hospital bed and trying to get my socks, pull in the grabber and get my socks on.
Yeah. So that's been great, because I've picked up things before where I'm like, I couldn't bend. That's another thing. Not, bending down was the one thing I haven't been able to do. I have expanders, so they provide a little bit extra weight.
Yeah.
So bending over is a little uncomfortable, and they recommend also once you have after her surgery not to do that because of your blood pressure. Yeah. But so that's some of the prep work there. But yeah, it's been 6 weeks. I finally got the go ahead to start doing a little more activity, which is exciting for me. I drove here for the second time I've driven since my surgery 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. So you're on the other side of this.
Yes.
And it's just going to be an uphill climb from here on out, right?
Right.
So because this is such a fresh diagnosis, how are you feeling about what the future holds and what this looks like in terms of breast cancer?
Well, I am fortunate enough, again, I am forever grateful to you calling and telling me about the PALB2 genetic mutation, and I'm forever grateful that I got it. I took your advice and got tested, because I was being monitored every 6 months. They've caught this early enough that with the double mastectomy, I don't need chemo. Now, I've been in prevention mode for years on, trying to do these screenings and, preventative measures in case to catch breast cancer early. And so now here I am looking at my future, and I have a lot of anxiety about it because from here on out, and I think you know this as well, there really isn't a lot of screening. It's kind of a wait and see, if you get have symptoms, then they'll do some scans and everything. So I'm fortunate and I'm happy, looking forward in my future. I'm like, this is kind of a bump in the road for me. It's like, okay, I got through it. I'm moving on. I'm going to do all the things that I wanted to do when I retired this past year. Finally I'm going to get to them. But in the back of my head, there's that anxiety of what if, and, am I going to be worried about every little symptom that I have?
And that's a real thing. Mm-hmm. It is a real thing.
I'm sure you have it too.
I do. As of a couple of weeks ago, something showed up, and so I'm going to have it checked. Are there things that pop up, and you go, okay, is this real? And so you're questioning yourself. Is this something that needs checked? Am I overreacting? And I think that in the response, when I've ever had any concern, I've been welcomed with, the physicians. What I'm feeling and what I'm seeing, it's real and it needs checked. And mm-hmm. so their point is to always prove that it's nothing, right? And that's where they want you to be. And so I think that's important. But yeah, there's a lot of anxiety that, and I think I can say that both you and I are definitely positive people. Mm-hmm. And our goal here is to be able to educate others that may be out there that have questions, or maybe they've been tested in the past, but at that point in time they weren't they didn't test the panel for mm-hmm. genes like PALB2, and so we can encourage to make sure that people are being diligent in having the screenings and so forth done. But yeah, in the back, even though we're positive, it sits in there in your head. Okay, what ifs?
Right.
So,
and you can't let those consume you. I mean, that's definitely mental health is something that is you need to pay attention to whenever you have this kind of a journey or have that genetic mutation.
Yeah. I think mental health is a really good point on this. So when you found out you had the gene mutation, you build a sense of community, right? Mm-hmm. So you do you want to share your experience and how you've kind of rallied around a community, or that you found community in this?
Talking to what I did was I talked to a lot of people who'd been through it. So like I said, you were one of my first calls.
Yeah.
And sitting down with you and talking about just all the things I'm going to feel, I'm going to experience, and how to deal with that. My husband also has been, my rock, and I sometimes would get a little over anxious about things, and he's the one to, okay, don't do anything until you know the facts. He's been really good, and my whole medical team has been fantastic. And of course, I have friends and friends I've talked to about this, but the support system is crucial. And I haven't needed to have counseling, but I know others have, and that can be extremely beneficial going through these kinds of events in your life.
Yeah, it's important. So what I'm headed on 5.5 years, throughout the past 5.5 years, I have been beyond blessed mm-hmm. to meet others that have been in our situation or that have experienced breast cancer. And it's just been that community. Once you meet somebody that's gone through what you have gone through, mm-hmm. and it's just really, you become that instant connection. You have that instant connection. And then, a couple of people that I've met along the way, their goal, they've taken their experience and they want to help others, and there's been outreach and so forth. So I've been really blessed in meeting different people, and they've been in different states and just along, mm-hmm. My path and journey. So it's been interesting. Yeah.
I've been attempting to educate folks about the PALB2, and I've put a few things out there, and I know you have as well, mm-hmm. Over the last couple of years. And just recently with this diagnosis, I put a post out there on Facebook, it was a positive post about my cancer diagnosis, but really hitting on the point that I wouldn't have known about this cancer diagnosis if I was just getting annual mammograms. If I didn't know about the PALB2, if I hadn't had the genetic testing. So I would have just been still on my normal 1-year annual mammogram cycle, but because I knew about the PALB2 and they put me on the 6-month cycle, they caught this so early. Who knows? I think about that a lot. If I hadn't been gotten tested in October for my annual breast MRI, I wouldn't have been tested again until April with my annual mammogram. And how much would it have grown with it being the triple negative and being an aggressive type of cancer?
Yeah.
So, I've had, since I've put a couple of posts out there on Facebook, I've had a few people reach out to me to say, hey, I just talked to my doctor today about getting genetic testing done, and I didn't know anything about this, and I've had quite a few people reach out and say, thank you, I was due for my mammogram, and I just called and scheduled my appointment when I saw your post. So trying to help folks to educate them and remind them that this is important.
Yeah, it is important, and I think a lot of times we as women, we're busy in our professional lives and with our children and, family. And sometimes we don't always remember to take care of ourselves.
Correct.
So I think it's nice that reminder is definitely out there. So we're going to pivot for just a minute and talk about, the second part of this, right? And what that means, with not only was it the breast cancer, but ovarian cancer. So,
right.
That's a piece that we haven't talked about, but it's an important one because, because ovarian cancer, there's a higher risk of cancer with the PALB2. I had gone in to an appointment and, he found something on one of my ovaries, and I'm going to back up again because back in when I was younger, I had a cyst removed from my ovary, so I started having trouble back in my 20s on that. But there's a whole thing that happens with a hysterectomy at
young age,
at surgical menopause too, when you go to have a hysterectomy for this. So I know you two had the hysterectomy as a preventative.
I actually didn't have a full hysterectomy. I met with a gynecologist oncologist, and it was kind of like checking the boxes of, I'm meeting with a geneticist, I'm meeting with a regular oncologist, a breast surgeon, and then now they're sending me to a gynecologist oncologist who said that the majority of ovarian cancer cases are found in the fallopian tubes. So his recommendation was, let's get rid of the fallopian tubes and the ovaries. So still have my uterus, so but I've lowered my risk of ovarian cancer significantly.
Yeah. So that's one of the measures that you can do with the ovarian to help with the ovarian cancer. So have you experienced the surgical menopause?
I guess, actually, no, I haven't, because I had already passed that point.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate, I guess, if you call it menopause fortunate. I was fortunate to have gone through that before they did the surgery.
Yeah.
But I know many others are not so lucky.
Right. Yeah. And I think what the recommendation is on ovarian cancer, at least I think this is the guidelines my daughters have been given. Whoever has had the ovarian cancer in your family, they want you to start the screenings 10 years prior to that diagnosis. It's kind of what I've heard the rule of thumb is. So what about pancreatic cancer screening?
So with that one, I actually see a gastroenterologist, and they have scheduled an annual scan of my midsection to go to look at the pancreas, because pancreatic cancer is definitely hard to diagnose, and so that's one of the concerns is you don't want to find it too late.
Yeah, so
I'm getting the annual MRI.
And you're doing MRIs. Okay. They have, so I'm meeting with an oncologist, and they have me right now doing CAT scans, and then they're going to end up doing an ultrasound scope, I think, the next time around. But yeah, I've been doing the CAT scan. So you're doing the MRIs. So, yeah. Okay. Very interesting. But it's good, so those are on an annual basis. Just, you're right, because pancreatic cancer is hard to diagnose, and sometimes once it's diagnosed, it's too late.
Right.
But, so, for listeners out there, that may be listening to this podcast, is there anything that you can think of that we haven't talked about yet that you would just like, to be able to be a voice to educate?
Well, it's kind of the same thing and I have briefly mentioned this before about if you do have a family history and you look into talk to your doctor about getting tested, doing the genetic testing. Not only is there the BRCA genes or the PALB2, there's others. I have a friend who has one that's called CHEK2.
Yep.
And she was adopted, so she didn't know her family history. But to talk to your doctor about the genetic testing, because assuming you want to know, but knowledge is power, and if you know these things, you can do some preventative measures to lower your risk, lower your chances.
Yeah, so remind me, our grandmother was how old?
Oh gosh, somewhere she had to be in her 40s.
Yeah. So, I mean, look at where, being able to have that knowledge and where we are today. They didn't have that available or they didn't take those measures then.
Well, and even now there's instances of breast cancer. Women are getting breast cancer earlier. I had a friend who was 38 who was diagnosed. So, if you have that family history, I think is the crucial thing. If you have the family history, talk to your doctor about the genetic testing, because you may be able to. In my case, or in others' cases, you may be able to have your insurance pay for it and not have to shell out any money for it out of pocket.
Yeah, I think you're correct. Mine was paid for, right? But I think there also too. I've heard this. I don't know, but I think there also is some genetic testing that you can get, even though your insurance doesn't pay for it. So I guess if you're out there, if you've got family history and you really want to know, that's something that you may want to get out there and explore on that. But yeah, so. Well, Kelly, as we wrap up here today, I know that you've just gone through this diagnosis, and I know you and I both have been advocates for the genetic testing, and we've seen how it's been beneficial to our families. But I will jump in here and kind of talk about my youngest daughter. She was 30-some years old when she had her mastectomy, and she also had the DIEP flap. So she had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at home. And, she's on the other side of it, right? So sometimes when you're going through it, even if you've got the younger children and you've got to go through it, just build your support group there and take advantage of when somebody says, how can I help, right? What can I do? Say yes if you can, particularly, in her case where she had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. It took an army for us to make that happen and to get her through those 6 to 7 weeks of healing that it took. But for her, it was important because she had a problem that was happening, and so she had to make that decision. It was time to go through that then. And, everybody's journey's different.
Exactly.
Everybody's journey's different. So, maybe...
We are two examples of that.
We are two examples of that. Exactly. So, well, I really appreciate you joining me here on this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe in the future there'll be another reason to have conversations, but I feel it was very important to sit down and talk and share. We've got a really strong family history of cancer, and so we were able to take the actions and have the knowledge and the power to do where we are today. I just hope that you continue to heal and in the way you are, and stay positive, and I know you're going to do great. So
thank you.
All right.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed having this discussion.
Yes.
And hopefully some of your listeners will benefit from this and be able to follow through and talk to their doctors about genetic testing.
Yeah. And if there's anybody out there that's listening that does have questions or answers, I am opening myself up to be available to contact. I don't have all the medical knowledge, but I definitely can share my experiences, and I can direct, I'd be happy to direct in to where you need to go to find that information. And if you're out there and you're thinking about getting that genetic testing, just do it.
Right.
Just do it. Just make that time available to yourself. Invest in yourself to get this done.
Right.
So
agree.
Yeah. One other thing I'll add. So health-wise, exercise, and we didn't talk about this, and so I do want to come back here and just ask. We'll wrap it up after this, but have you changed any of your habits in terms of what you're eating and exercising? Since you've had this possibility that you could have cancer and then got the diagnosis.
I have. So I had already been exercising, but probably not as much as I could have been. I had seen a trainer for a couple of years, and so I was doing some exercising. My eating habits, I'll admit, especially once I retired, I don't think I thought I had visions of cooking these nice healthy meals every day. Well, I hadn't. We were trying to do some things and traveling, and then my eating habits were not so good. So since then, my eating is better with cutting out sugar and eating more whole foods, and trying to really pay attention to my body more, and like what the foods are doing, how I'm feeling when I eat certain foods. And I've done a lot of research on that. I do a lot of internet searching on that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So those are probably that, and since this diagnosis is definitely trying to enjoy each day and try to go into each day with a positive attitude, and try not to let things bring you down.
Yeah.
Because we're only here for so long.
Yes. Yeah.
Enjoy it while you're here.
That's right. All right. I think that's really important to make the most of each day.
Right.
And I love the fact that you brought in the exercise, and it does, the mental health, what it does for your mental health too is really, really important. So,
Absolutely.
all right. Well, great. Again, thanks for joining me here today on the Keeping It Healthy podcast. And I look forward to opportunities for the future.